My father, Daniel Jacobson, teams up with the elders in my family to launch the family app. Every child's behavior is converted into points, and those points determine who inherits the family's wealth. As the least favored daughter in the family, I am one of the first people forced to use it. You earn 1 point for greeting your parents. Massaging shoulders or washing feet gives you 10 points. Handing over your entire paycheck gets you 1,000 points. This is my original digital system for measuring good behavior. If I dare complain even once, or if I rank last on the scoreboard, Dad humiliates me relentlessly in the family group chat. He even forces me to kneel and wash the feet of whoever has the highest score as an apology. He looks at my hands that are red and scalded from the hot water and sighs. Then, his expression turns resolute again as he says, "I know it hurts now, but this is for your own good." A rough diamond has to be cut and polished before it can sparkle. I'm helping to smooth away your rough edges so your future will be smoother. The point system is my greatest achievement. It's the deepest expression of a father's love. Today is Independence Day. It's also our family's annual scoreboard finalizing day. Dad invites all our relatives over. In front of everyone, he plans to announce that I, the child who ranks last, will be disowned. He wants everyone to see what happens to anyone who dares challenge his authority. I'm doing this for the good of our family. Without rules, there can be no order. And without a strict upbringing, you won't build up the perfect character. One day, you'll understand my good intentions. But, Dad, I have already ended my own life by overdosing on some medicine. Right now, my lifeless body lies cold in the room upstairs, waiting for you to uncover it with your own hands. This isn't punishment. It's love, the deep, unwavering love of a father. My father, Daniel Jacobson, stood before the memorial plaques with his hands pinned behind his back. Below the raised platform sat our relatives, all of them silent. The family app scoreboard was shown on the large screen. My name had been circled. I'd scored the lowest on the board. Pointing at my name, Dad exclaimed loudly, "A complacent, unambitious person like this is not worthy of being my child. I know you all think I'm being cruel." He raised his voice so that it reverberated through the chapel. But a diamond in the rough demands to be mercilessly shaped and polished until it shines. I'm crushing her pride today so she can survive. The antique clock in the corner of the chapel struck 9. It was judgment time. His words cut off. Dad frowned and glanced at the door. No one stood there. "Where is she?" The relatives' whispers grew to a clamor. "Eric." Dad turned to my older brother, Eric Jacobson, the model child with charm and brains. "Have her come down." Eric immediately rose to his feet and gave an obedient nod. I watched as he took the steps up the wooden staircase beside the chapel, the familiar lines of his silhouette bringing back memories from 3 mornings ago. As the member with the lowest score on the family app scoreboard, I'd been the only one standing that day while the rest of the family ate breakfast. On the dining table was a spread of warm milk, scrambled eggs, and golden brown toast. Dad had been slowly slicing through the scrambled eggs on his plate. He didn't even spare me a glance. Rules are rules. No sooner had he said this than the phone in my pocket sounded, not with a call, but with the app's mechanical voice that rang loud and clear. User, Andrea Jacobson. Total score, -78. Ranking, last place. Breakfast privileges for the day are revoked. Initiating punishment protocol, memorize an excerpt from the Florilegia of the Filial. Eric had met my eyes, which shone with a silent plea for help, and thoughtfully suggested, "Dad, perhaps Andrea could sit and memorize the excerpt instead of remaining standing." Dad had glanced at him and said nothing. A second later, Eric's phone buzzed as well. It had been a warning from Dad. Eric held his tongue at once, lowering his head numbly. Unsatisfied, Dad added to my punishment, forbidding me to sit until I'd memorized the excerpt from the Florilegia of the Filial 300 times. Eric's footsteps came from the staircase, and he stopped before my tightly shut bedroom door. The few heavy knocks on the door were met with silence on the other side. "Andrea, Dad wants you in the chapel." The rest of the family's waiting. There was still no response. "Did you hear me? Andrea, are you trying to get me punished alongside you?" "I'm talking to you. Say something." The knocks grew louder until Eric was full on banging on the door. The wooden door creaked under his fist, rattling as if it would cave and splinter. It was precisely the sound of impatient knocking that startled me awake a month ago. I'd found myself dragged out of bed, still in my sleepwear, and cornered in Dad's study. It began when I found a glitch in the app's programming. As long as we checked into the system at 4:44 a.m., our points would stack once by mistake. I told my only older brother, Eric, of the secret. "Look, Eric." I presented him with my phone as if it were some rare treasure. "This way, we won't lose our points." He leaned in close and flashed me a gentle smile. "Is that right? You didn't tell Dad, did you?" I shook my head, thrilled by our conspiracy. "We're the only ones who know about this." Eric had ruffled my hair. "Clever little thing. Let's keep this to ourselves. Leave it to me." After that, I found myself in the study late at night, pinned under Dad's gaze as he sat behind his large, mahogany work desk. Eric stood behind him with his head low. "Well, aren't we brilliant, figuring out ways to play the system?" My heart sank. I glanced at Eric, but he avoided my gaze. At that moment, Dad's phone chimed with a notification. A mechanical female voice spelled out my crime and Eric's accomplishment. User Eric Jacobson has reported system cheating behavior and protected the integrity of the family rules. 200 points added. Eric heaved a sigh, as if he couldn't bear to see me punished. It's for your own good, Andrea. We need to correct your misbehavior and ill intentions as soon as possible so you can become a qualified heir. It was why Dad created the app in the first place. He earned an approving look from Dad, prompting him to flash me a wider grin. I was plagued by countless nightmares after that. Eric's insincere grin was in all of them. The banging outside the door finally stopped. I heard Eric's footsteps disappear downstairs. Dad, she's locked the door and refuses to open it. There was a brief silence in the chapel, followed by Dad's angry growl. Useless piece of trash. First, there was the sound of furniture scraping against the floor. Then came the thud of heavy footsteps on the wooden staircase, growing louder as they approached me. At last, the footsteps stopped outside my door. A loud bang echoed off the walls. The door rattled. Dad hadn't knocked. He'd kicked the door. Andrea. When I count to 3, I want you out of that room. 1. He began to count. 2. The door remained shut. Whispers from the chapel rose through the floorboards. How dare you disobey me? Dad kicked the door. There was another bang. The next second, I heard him take out his phone and tap the screen frantically. He'd remembered the other weapon in his arsenal. User Andrea Jacobson has broken family rules and refused to follow orders. Highest level of punishment initiated. The user is requested to open the door now. The mechanical female voice of the family app hadn't sounded from my phone but from Dad's on the other side of the door. A second had passed since the order, then 2. And yet, the door remained firmly shut. Warning, target user's equipment is offline. Unable to deliver order. For the first time, the digital shackles Dad had created had failed him. The discussion in the chapel grew louder. Fighting back? Quite the rebel, aren't we? Get the spare key. Dad roared. Eric, get it from my study. Eric's hurried footsteps faded into the distance before they returned just as hastily. The key slotted into the keyhole and turned. The door unlocked with a click and was pushed open, but the gap was no bigger than a finger's breadth before the door stopped short. There was a muffled thud, as if something had been propped against the door on the other side. Dad, I can't push it all the way open. Eric's voice quaked. Something's blocking it. Move. Dad shoved Eric aside, then took 2 steps back before lunging forward, shoving his shoulder against the door. A resounding bang echoed off the walls. The building seemed to shake, and the door creaked in protest. I couldn't help but tremble. The sound suddenly reminded me of the deafening whir of the paper shredder in the study. That day, Dad found a metal box under my bed during his weekly room check. Inside the metal box were the things I'd secretly stored away after Mom's passing, a few faded pictures I had with her and a couple of birthday cards she'd written me. Dad had taken the metal box to the study and tipped its contents onto the expensive mahogany desk while I watched. What are these? My mom, I'd answered. The dead should be buried and left in the trash bin inside our memories. He pinched the picture I'd taken with Mom on the beach between his fingers, lifting it from the pile. Mom's smile was bright in the picture. Holding on to these useless emotions will only make you weak, and our family has no place for the weak. He turned on the paper shredder beside the desk. It roared to life and warmed up. Without another word, Dad fed the picture into the opening of the paper shredder. I watched as Mom's smiling face stretched out of shape between the blades and came out the other side in countless thin ribbons. No. The word was barely more than a squeak as it escaped my throat. But Dad didn't stop. He picked up a card with Mom's delicate handwriting. To my dearest Andy, happy birthday. The paper shredder whirred and then clicked. Mom's written birthday blessing became a pile of colorful paper strips. Dad had fed all my useless emotions through the paper shredder. When he was done, he pointed at the small pile of colorful paper shreds. Clean that up. I want that mess off my carpet. Presently, Dad's heavy panting came from the other side of the door. Eric, come here. We'll knock this door down together. Yes, right away, Dad. I heard 2 sets of footsteps shuffle around outside as they adjusted their positions. I also heard Dad and Eric draw deep breaths. I heard 2 sets of footsteps shuffle around outside as Dad and Eric adjusted their positions. I also heard them draw deep breaths. Another bang. Another hard shove against the door, which caved under impact. A crack sounded through the air as the wood splintered. Terrified, I curled into a ball. The most painful memories buried deep in my soul swarmed over my head, drowning me. Breathing became difficult. It was the eve of Independence Day. In an attempt to show our family's united front, Dad held a barbecue specially for the occasion. Grease from the meat skewers dripped over crackling flames and red-hot charcoal, the heat rising from the pit carrying with it a mouth-watering, smoky scent. Our relatives sat huddled around the barbecue pit as if it were a camping event. Everyone was beaming and laughing. Eric perched beside me, diligently turning the skewers for Dad and addressing him with just the right amount of respect. Dad ate it up. Eric's working on quite a forward-looking project in our company this year. Dad praised Eric's visionary work in front of our relatives. I lowered my head and poked a piece of meat with a skewer. Suddenly, I felt something icy being fished out from under my shirt collar. It was the silver necklace, the only thing Mom left behind. What's this? Eric pinched the small crescent moon pendant between his fingers. It's already black with oxidation. Why are you still wearing it? I tried to snatch it. Give it back. Eric raised his arms so that the necklace was out of my reach. He dangled it before Dad. See what Andrea's got, Dad. She's still holding on to useless things like this necklace. Didn't you say that improvement comes to those who can part with things? Dad's gaze lingered on the necklace for only a second. He said nothing, only picked up a large piece of meat from the grill, still dripping with grease, and set it on Eric's plate. Here. Eat up. Only then did he take the necklace from Eric. He didn't so much as look at it. Trash. Dad flicked his wrist, and the delicate silver necklace and its tiny crescent moon pendant drew an arc through the air, landing on the burning hot grill. A hush settled around us. I watched as the silver necklace gradually discolored above the embers of the crackling charcoal, surrounded by smoke and grease. It wasn't long before the silver crescent moon turned black. No one spoke up for me. The relatives acted like they hadn't seen this turn of events. Eric even smiled as he speared the piece of meat Dad had put on his plate. He blew on it to cool it, then popped it into his mouth. His words came out muffled as he spoke around the chewed-up meat. Thank you, Dad. Dad turned a skewer on the grill. Eat your food. I stared at the food smoking on the grill. I wasn't hungry anymore. What was left of Mom was left to blacken among the scraps of food on the grill. It was just as well, I supposed, that the necklace went before me. With a final bang, the door caved open, and splinters flew everywhere. The door hadn't been shoved open as much as it had imploded. Its frame hung crookedly off the wall. Dad had shouldered the door open, and the momentum made him stagger as he barged into the room. Eric, equally winded, trailed after him. But they both stopped short. There was none of the mess and resistance they'd expected to be waiting for them in the room. On the contrary, everything was too organized. The books had been stacked neatly on the desk. The chair had been put away under the desk, too, and the curtains were open halfway. The afternoon sun spilled through the window at a slanted angle, illuminating a single spot on the floor. I lay quietly on the bed, wearing my favorite white dress. I was completely silent. Eric's breath grew shallow and erratic. Frowning, he hurried over to the bed. What's playing dead going to do for you? Get up already. His words died on his tongue. He reached for my arm to pull me out of bed, but drew his hand back the moment his fingertips grazed my skin. Such was not the temperature of a living person. Eric stared at me, then slowly and stiffly turned his gaze to my nightstand. On it was a bottle of sleeping pills, already emptied. My phone lay next to it, its screen still bright. The familiar interface of the family app was on display. My total score was last recorded at a negative figure in red, and my name ranked lowest on the scoreboard. The blue icon was facing the entire room. Eric's face went from an angry shade of red to deathly white. He parted his lips to say something but couldn't seem to find his voice. A dry croak escaped his throat. He backed away, only to knock over the chair by the bed after his knees caved in. He fell in a heap. Dad froze at the door. Rage had been churning in his chest when he shoved the door open. The excuses he'd prepared and the show of fatherly love he was about to put on for the relatives popped like bubbles alongside Eric's wordless response. He looked past Eric's limp figure on the ground toward me, then noted the empty prescription bottle on my nightstand. At last, his gaze fixed on my still bright phone screen. The admonishment and humiliation he prepared for me were now pointless. Meanwhile, the relatives in the chapel downstairs finally sensed the odd silence above them. Their frenzied whispering ended. Someone couldn't keep their curiosity at bay any longer and stood up, craning their neck to peer up the stairwell. Dad still stood at the door, unmoving. The judgment he'd readied for me had started. Only now, he was the subject. The silence that filled my bedroom was unlike the quiet Dad usually demanded. His silence was a weapon, a heavy, suffocating pressure meant to force compliance. This silence, however, was absolute. It was the silence of a stopped heart. Eric remained on the floor, his back pressed against the legs of my writing desk. His chest heaved as if he were the one running out of oxygen, his eyes wide and fixed on my pale, unmoving face. Andrea, his voice was barely a whisper, a fragile thread of sound. This isn't funny. Get up. Dad's going to be furious. You've made your point. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers hovering inches above my cold ankle, which peeked out from the hem of my white dress. He couldn't bring himself to touch me again. The memory of that first icy contact seemed to have burned his fingertips. Behind him, Dad hadn't moved. He stood in the shattered doorway, the splintered wood framing him like a ruined picture. His face was a mask of disbelief, his Jaw tight, his lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. He was a man who prided himself on absolute control. He had designed a system that governed every breath his children took, every penny they earned, every emotion they expressed. To him, my death was not a tragedy, it was a malfunction. An error code in his perfect program. Get her up, Eric, Dad said. His voice was low, devoid of any warmth, but there was a tremor in it, a tiny, structural crack in his iron facade. She's throwing a tantrum. She took something to make herself look sick. Get the emergency kit from the cabinet. Dad. Eric's voice cracked. He looked up, his eyes glassy with terror. She's not breathing. Her skin, she's cold. She's really cold. I said, get her up. Dad roared, taking a sudden step into the room. The floorboards groaned under his weight. He snatched the empty pill bottle from the nightstand, his eyes scanning the label. His knuckles turned white. This is a theatrical stunt. A pathetic attempt to ruin today. She knew everyone was downstairs. She did this to humiliate me. I watched them from the quiet corner of the ceiling, where the shadows gathered. It was a strange sensation, being detached from the physical vessel that had caused me so much agony. For the first time in years, my head didn't hurt. The phantom smell of grease and burnt silver from yesterday's barbecue was gone, replaced by the clean, sterile scent of the room. Downstairs, the murmur of our relatives grew louder. The anticipation of my public disownment had kept them quiet for a while, but the long delay and the sound of the door being kicked down had sparked their curiosity. Daniel? Aunt Clara's voice drifted up the stairwell, cautious and sharp. Is everything all right up there? We heard a crash. Do we need to come up? Dad froze. The bottle of sleeping pills clutched in his hand seemed to weigh 100 pounds. If the relatives came up, if they saw me lying here, the narrative he had carefully constructed, the image of a firm, loving patriarch guiding his family with a digital iron fist, would shatter. Stay down there. Dad called out, his voice instantly shifting back into its authoritative, booming register. Andrea is throwing a tantrum. She's locked herself in. We're handling it. Give us a moment. He turned back to Eric, his eyes burning with a desperate, frantic energy. Put her in the closet. Lock the door. We'll finish the ceremony downstairs, send everyone home, and then we'll call the private clinic. We can't let them see this. Not today. Not on Independence Day. Eric stared at him, horror washing over his face. Dad, she's dead. We can't just hide her body. That's a crime. The only crime here is her trying to destroy this family's reputation. Dad hissed, grabbing Eric by the shoulder and dragging him to his feet. Do you want the police here? Do you want the media? The family app is launching its public beta next month. If this gets out, the company is ruined. Your inheritance is ruined. Do you understand me, Eric? The word inheritance hit Eric like a physical blow. The panic in his eyes shifted, morphing into a cold, calculating terror. He looked at me, then at the empty pill bottle, and finally at Dad. The moral conflict in his mind lasted for less than a second. Okay, Eric whispered, his voice trembling. Okay. Let's do it. Quickly. But as Eric took a step toward my bed, my phone, still lying on the nightstand, vibrated. A sharp, high-pitched chime echoed through the quiet room. It wasn't the standard notification sound of the family app. It was a custom tone, one I had programmed myself during those late nights when I pretended to be asleep. The screen flashed, and a new window popped up on the interface. User, Andrea Jacobson. Status, offline. Emergency protocol, will of the departed, initiated. Dad's pocket buzzed. Eric's pocket buzzed. And downstairs, in the chapel, dozens of phones buzzed in perfect unison. The mechanical female voice of the family app, which had once been the soundtrack to my torment, now echoed throughout the entire house. It didn't just play from our phones, it came from the smart speakers Dad had installed in every room, including the chapel downstairs. Attention all users, the voice announced, its tone flat and digital. An unprecedented event has occurred. User, Andrea Jacobson has been marked as deceased due to self-administered chemical toxicity. According to the foundational bylaws of the family app, Section 9, Clause 4, in the event of a user's death under suspicious circumstances, all administrator privileges are suspended pending a full system audit. Dad's face drained of all color. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb frantically tapping the screen. Cancel. Override admin code 0-7-0-4. Cancel. Protocol. Input unrecognized. The speaker above my bed chimed cheerfully. Administrator. Credentials temporarily frozen. Entering safety mode. No, no, no. Dad muttered, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He tapped the screen so hard I thought he would crack the glass. This is impossible. I wrote the code. I designed the database. There is no such clause. He was right. He hadn't written that clause. I had. During the weeks after he shredded my mother's photos, I realized that the only way to escape his digital prison was to master its design. Dad was a self-taught programmer, proud and arrogant, but he wasn't a professional. He had built the family app on an open-source framework, leaving backdoors and vulnerabilities that a determined, desperate teenager could easily exploit. I didn't just find a glitch to earn double points at 4:44 a.m. That was a decoy, a minor secret I knew Eric would eventually sell out to Dad for his own gain. While they were busy celebrating Eric's loyalty and punishing my cheating, I had quietly rewritten the core logic of the system. I had tied my heart rate monitor, synced to the smartwatch I wore even in my sleep, directly to the app's database. The moment my pulse dropped to 0 and stayed there for more than 10 minutes, the system was programmed to lock down. Downstairs, the chapel had gone completely silent. The relatives, who had been chatting amiably, were now staring at their phones. What is this? Aunt Clara's voice drifted up, no longer cautious, but laced with a growing, horrified confusion. Andrea, deceased. Chemical toxicity. What is the app talking about? Daniel. Uncle Thomas called out from the bottom of the stairs. Daniel, what is going on up there? Is this some kind of joke? Dad's hands were shaking so violently he dropped his phone. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, the screen facing upward, still displaying the crimson warning sign. We have to go, Eric panicked, clutching his head. Dad, they know. The app just sent a broadcast to everyone. We can't hide her now. They're coming up. Shut up. Dad snarled, though his voice lacked its usual commanding force. He knelt to pick up his phone, his mind racing to find a way out of the corner he had painted himself into. We tell them she had a medical emergency. An accidental overdose. Yes, a tragic accident. We didn't know. We were trying to save her. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wild, searching for any detail that could support his lie. But my room was too clean. The empty pill bottle, the neatly stacked books, the open curtains. It looked like a cold, calculated farewell. Before Dad could even stand up, the smart speakers throughout the house chimed. Again. Initiating system audit, the mechanical voice declared. To determine the contributing factors of user, Andrea Jacobson's offline status, the system will now play the compiled, behavioral logs from the past 30 days. This broadcast is shared with all connected family devices and public cloud backups. Dad's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. Stop it, he screamed at the ceiling. Turn it off. Cut the power. Eric, go to the basement. Flip the main breaker. Now. But it was too late. The smart speakers in the chapel, the living room, and my bedroom began to play an audio file. The sound was crystal clear, capturing the cold, hollow acoustics of Dad's study. What are these? Dad's recorded voice echoed through the house, sharp and demanding. My mom, my own young, fragile voice replied. The dead should be buried and left in the trash bin inside our memories. Holding on to these useless emotions will only make you weak, and our family has no place for the weak. The sound of a paper shredder whirring to life filled the house, its low mechanical grind echoing in the chapel where our relative sat. No, my recorded voice whispered, a sound of absolute despair. Clean that up. I want that mess off my carpet. The recording cut off, replaced by the mechanical chime of the app. Log 1, Emotional Deconstruction. Points deducted from user, Andrea Jacobson. -500. Administrator, Daniel Jacobson. In the chapel downstairs, the silence was broken by a collective gasp. Our relatives were not saintly people. They were greedy, sycophantic, and terrified of Daniel. They had tolerated the family app because they wanted a piece of the Jacobson fortune, and they had happily watched me suffer because it meant their own children looked better by comparison. But hearing the raw, clinical cruelty of a father destroying his deceased wife's memory in front of his grieving daughter was a different matter entirely. It was a glimpse into a level of malice that made them look at their own phones with a sudden, chilling dread. Oh my God, Aunt Clara whispered. Upstairs, Eric was frozen. He hadn't run to the basement. He couldn't. His legs refused to move. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that the system audit wasn't going to stop with Dad. Dad, Eric whimpered, his voice cracking. The breaker, we have to. I'm going. Dad roared, his face twisted in a mask of primal rage. He shoved past Eric, nearly knocking him over, and sprinted down the hallway toward the stairs. But as his feet hit the top step, the speakers chimed again. Log 2, System Integrity Report. This time, the audio was different. It was the sound of a late-night conversation, the voices hushed but clear. Look, Eric. This way, we won't lose our points. Is that right? You didn't tell Dad, did you? We're the only ones who know about this. Clever little thing. Let's keep this to ourselves. Leave it to me. There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of Dad's study door opening, and then the mechanical voice of the app from a month ago. User Eric Jacobson has reported system cheating behavior and protected the integrity of the family rules. 200 points added. Then came Eric's voice, dripping with false sympathy. It's for your own good, Andrea. We need to correct your misbehavior and ill intentions as soon as possible so you can become a qualified heir. It was why Dad created the app in the first place. The relatives downstairs looked at Eric's empty seat in the chapel. The model child, the brilliant and obedient heir, was revealed to be a snake who had sold out his own sister's trust for a handful of digital points. You thief, Aunt Clara muttered, her voice carrying up the stairs. He stole her idea and used it to punish her. Eric slumped against my desk, his face buried in his hands. He was crying now. But not for me. He was crying because the golden future he had built on my back was crumbling into dust. It was just a game, Eric whispered to the empty room. It was just points. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Dad had stopped halfway down the stairs. He could hear the muttering of the relatives below him. He could see them looking up at him through the wooden banister, their faces filled with a mixture of horror, disgust, and a strange, opportunistic satisfaction. Daniel, Uncle Thomas said, standing at the base of the stairs, blocking Dad's path. What did you do to that girl? This is family business. Dad shouted, his voice cracking under the strain of maintaining his authority. Andrea is a troubled child. She has mental issues. I was trying to build her character. The app. The app is a tool for self-improvement. A tool? Aunt Clara stood up, her phone held high. It says here she's dead. Daniel. It says she took sleeping pills. Is she dead up there? Is my niece dead? In your house while we're sitting here waiting to celebrate her disownment? She's fine. Dad lied, his voice rising to a panicked shriek. She's just asleep. She's acting. Then let us see her, Uncle Thomas said, his face hardening. Let us go up and check on her. No. Dad stepped down, trying to block the stairs, but he was one man against a room full of people who had suddenly realized that the tyrant of their family was vulnerable. Before anyone could take another step, the final audio log began to play. It was the sound of yesterday's barbecue. The crackle of charcoal. The light. Laughter of the relatives in the background. What's this? It's already black with oxidation. Why are you still wearing it? Eric's recorded voice asked. Give it back. See what Andrea's got, Dad. She's still holding on to useless things like this necklace. Didn't you say that improvement comes to those who can part with things? There was a heavy silence, followed by the sound of a metallic object hitting a hot grill, and then the sizzle of metal on burning charcoal. Trash. Dad's voice was cold, flat, and absolute. The recording ended, but the app didn't chime. Instead, a video file began to play on the large projector screen in the chapel, the screen Dad had set up to show my failing score. It was a video recorded from the security camera in my room, dated last night. It showed me sitting on the edge of my bed, my hands red and blistered from the boiling water Dad had forced me to use to wash Eric's feet earlier that week. I was holding a small, blackened piece of metal, the remains of Mom's silver crescent moon necklace, which I had secretly retrieved from the cold ashes of the grill after everyone had gone to sleep. I didn't cry in the video. I just stared at the necklace, my expression completely blank. Then, I reached into my drawer, pulled out the bottle of sleeping pills, and poured them into my hand. I looked directly at the camera. My eyes were hollow, empty of any hope, but there was a quiet, terrifying peace in them. Happy Independence Day, Dad, I said to the camera. I'm finally free. The screen went black. The silence that followed the video was suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. The relatives who had laughed and ate barbecue just 24 hours ago now looked at the screen as if they had been forced to watch an execution. Which, in a way, they had. My God, Aunt Clara gasped, covering her mouth as tears finally welled in her eyes. Daniel, you monster. It was an accident. Dad screamed, his voice echoing off the high ceiling of the chapel. He scrambled down the remaining steps, his eyes darting from face to face, looking for a single ally. She was unstable. You all saw how she behaved. She was always rebellious. I did everything for her. I gave her a home, an education, a future. You killed her, Uncle Thomas said, his voice flat and heavy. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Dad. You and your damn app. You turned your own children into software projects and pushed her until she broke. Get out of my house, Dad hissed, his hands curling into fists. Get out. All of you. This is my house. I am the head of this family. We're leaving, Aunt Clara said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and disgust. But we're not going home. We're calling the police. You wouldn't dare, Dad threatened, stepping toward her. You think your hands are clean? Clara, your son received 500 points last week for reporting his classmates cheating, which I converted into a $10,000 allowance from the family fund. You all took the money. You all played the game. Clara flinched, but she didn't back down. That was before we knew you were driving your daughter to suicide, Daniel. The police are going to see everything. That app of yours. It recorded it all. As if on cue, the smart speakers throughout the house chimed once more. System audit complete, the mechanical voice announced. A copy of the behavioral logs, system overrides, and security footage has been successfully uploaded to the local police department database and shared with regional media outlets under the subject, the Jacobson family tragedy, a digital abuse case study. Dad's jaw dropped. His knees buckled, and he sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, his phone slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the marble floor. I had spent my final days ensuring that there would be no cover-up. I knew Dad's wealth and influence could easily buy the silence of local doctors, private clinics, and even the police if the tragedy remained behind closed doors. But by tying the data released to my heart rate monitor and programming an automated multi-channel distribution list, I had bypassed his power entirely. The story was already out. Within minutes, the phones of the relatives began to buzz with news alerts. Local journalists, always hungry for a scandal involving the wealthy Jacobson family, were already dissecting the leaked files. It's trending, one of the cousins whispered, staring at his screen. There are articles popping up. Billionaire's daughter dies after tech-enabled abuse. Eric emerged from the top of the stairs, his face pale and tear-stained. He looked down at the crowd of relatives, then at Dad, who sat defeated on the steps. Dad, Eric whispered, his voice trembling. What do we do? Dad didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, his mind finally realizing the magnitude of what he had done, not to me, but to himself. His reputation, his company, his precious digital system, everything he had built his identity upon, was gone. The sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, growing louder and closer with every second. The days that followed my death were a blur of cold, clinical procedures. The police arrived, their flashing red and blue lights painting the walls of our house in stark, dramatic colors. They carried my body out in a black bag, a sight that caused a crowd of reporters to gather at the gates of our estate. Dad and Eric were taken in for questioning. The media circus was relentless. The family app, which Dad had hoped would revolutionize modern parenting, was universally condemned as a psychological torture device. The public outrage was immediate and fierce. Dad's company, Jacobson Tech, saw its stock price plummet to near zero within 48 hours. The board of directors immediately ousted him, issuing a public statement distancing themselves from his unorthodox and deeply disturbing personal practices. But the real punishment didn't happen in the courts or on the stock exchange. It happened inside the empty, silent walls of the Jacobson mansion. Because of the ongoing investigation, the house was sealed as a potential crime scene. Dad and Eric were released on bail, forced to return to the very place where they had spent years torturing me. Without their wealth, their servants, or their social standing, the house felt less like a palace and more like a tomb. I watched them sit in the dark living room, the beautiful mahogany furniture covered in a thin layer of dust. The power had been restored, but the house remained freezing. Neither of them had the energy to turn on the heating. Eric sat on the sofa, his eyes hollow and dark. He hadn't showered in days, and his expensive clothes were wrinkled and stained. We have to sell the house, Eric said, his voice flat. The lawyers are demanding another retainer, and the company's shares are worthless. We have nothing left, Dad. Dad sat in his favorite armchair, his eyes fixed on the empty fireplace. He looked 10 years older. The resolute, arrogant patriarch was gone, replaced by a frail, broken man who couldn't even look his remaining son in the eye. This was her plan, Dad whispered, his voice dry and raspy. She did this to destroy us. No, Eric said, a sudden spark of anger in his voice. She didn't do this to destroy us, Dad. She did this to escape us. We destroyed ourselves. Dad turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing. You dare speak to me like that? I built this family. I built your future. You built a prison. Eric screamed, standing up and towering over his father. You made me betray my own sister for points. You made me watch as you burned her mother's necklace. And I did it because I was terrified of you. I wanted your approval, I wanted your money, and now look at us. We have nothing. I am a pariah, Dad. No university will take me, no company will hire me. I am the brother who helped kill his sister. I did it for your own good. Dad roared back, but the words sounded weak, empty, and pathetic. A rough diamond must be cut. His voice trailed off. The metaphor, which he had used as a shield for so many years, finally felt hollow even to him. Suddenly, the smart speaker on the mantelpiece chimed. It was the familiar, cheerful sound of the family app. Dad and Eric both froze, their eyes locking onto the device. System update, the mechanical voice announced. Current user balance, Daniel Jacobson. Total score, -1 million. Status, bankrupt. Initiating final penalty. Protocol. What? Dad muttered, standing up and approaching the speaker. The app is offline. The servers were seized by the police. Local server backup active, the voice responded instantly. According to the automated protocols established by user Andrea Jacobson, the system will remain active on all personal devices within the household until all outstanding debts are settled. A phone screen on the table lit up. It was Dad's old phone, the screen cracked, but still functioning. On it, the family app showed a new task list. There were no more points for greeting parents, or for handing over paychecks. The system had been entirely restructured. Task 1, kneel before the portrait of the deceased and express remorse. Value, 1 point. Task 2, clean the entire household without the use of automated appliances. Value, 10 points. Task 3, live on a restricted diet of water and plain bread. Value, 5 points per day. To regain administrator status and unlock personal assets, the voice explained, user, Daniel Jacobson must reach a score of 0. Current balance. -1 million. Dad stared at the screen, a look of sheer disbelief on his face. This is ridiculous. This is a program. I can just delete it. He grabbed the phone and tried to factory reset it. But the screen flashed red. Warning, device encryption locked. Attempting to bypass the system will result in the immediate release of additional encrypted financial records to federal tax investigators. Dad dropped the phone as if it had burned him. I had spent my final weeks digging into Dad's corporate accounts. I knew he had been skimming money from the company and hiding it in offshore accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle and his digital experiments. I had programmed the app to act as a dead man's switch. If he didn't follow the rules of my system, he wouldn't just lose his family, he would go to federal prison for tax evasion and corporate fraud. He was trapped. The very digital shackles he had created to control his family had been turned back upon him, tighter and more merciless than before. Dad, Eric whispered, looking at his own phone, which displayed a similar negative balance. We have to do it. The lawyers said if the federal investigators get those records, we're going away for 20 years. Dad looked from the phone to the empty wall where my mother's portrait used to hang. I had hidden a small, printed copy of her photo, the only one he hadn't managed to shred, behind the clock in the hallway. Eric had found it and placed it on the mantelpiece. The man who had once stood before the memorial plaques of his ancestors, demanding absolute submission, now stood before a small, cheap photo of his deceased wife and daughter. His knees trembled. The pride that had sustained him for decades was a heavy, useless weight. Slowly, painfully, Daniel Jacobson sank to his knees. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice choking on the words. The speaker chimed. Remorse recorded. User, Daniel Jacobson. Current score, -999,999. Remaining balance, 999,999 points. Continue compliance to improve character. Months passed, and the seasons shifted. The Jacobson mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, became a quiet, forgotten place. The gardens grew wild, the grass tall and untamed. The grand chapel downstairs was thick with dust and cobwebs, the large screen dark and silent. Inside, two men lived a quiet, miserable existence. They woke up at 4:44 a.m. every morning, not to earn double points, but because the app's alarm would sound relentlessly until they checked in. They spent their days cleaning the massive, empty rooms, their hands becoming rough, calloused, and blistered from the harsh detergents. They ate plain bread and drank tap water, their bodies growing thin and frail. They didn't talk to each other. The bond of loyalty they had once shared, built on a mutual desire for power and approval, had vanished. They were just two prisoners sharing the same cell, bound by the digital ghost of the girl they had broken. I watched them from the quiet, warm light of the afternoon sun that spilled through the hallway windows. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel the need for revenge. The point system, which Dad had called his greatest achievement and the deepest expression of a father's love, had finally found its true purpose. It was no longer a tool for abuse, it was a mirror, reflecting their own cruelty back at them, day after day, until they were forced to see themselves for what they truly were. One evening, as the sun began to set, Dad sat on the floor of the empty living room, his back resting against the cold fireplace. He held his phone in his worn, trembling hands. His current score was minus 950,000. He had been working for months, kneeling, cleaning, and starving, but the mountain he had to climb was still impossibly high. He would never reach zero. He would live the rest of his life under the shadow of my system. He looked up at the mantelpiece, where the small photo of Mom and me sat. In the photo, Mom was smiling, her arm wrapped around my shoulders. I was laughing, my eyes bright with a happiness I had long forgotten existed. Dad stared at the picture for a long time. For the first time, a tear escaped his eye, tracking a clean path down his dusty, hollow cheek. I know it hurts now, he whispered to the empty room, his voice a fragile, broken echo of the words he had once said to me. But this is for your own good. He closed his eyes and bowed his head, letting the silence of the house wash over him. Upstairs, in my old room, the window was open. A gentle summer breeze blew through the curtains, carrying with it the scent of fresh rain and wild flowers from the garden. The silver necklace, which I had secretly kept in my hand when I passed, was gone, but the memory of its weight was no longer a burden. I turned away from the house, stepping into the bright, endless light of the outside world. I was no longer the least favored daughter. I was no longer a number on a scoreboard. I was finally free.